Greetings and welcome to video number 3 in our All-Star VCAP series about site assessment. And we have Blair and Megan, and we're going to jump right in and start on this video, which is on design, build. Yeah, so this is kind of on that theme, right practice, right place. So at this stage, we certainly do hope we have picked the right practice in the right place, because this is kind of getting into the implementation stage of things. You can kind of see a couple field things there. And of course, when we're talking about design, the VCAP manual is the most important resource we have, one of several very important resources. Now I'm going to ask Blair a little bit about this, but obviously design is kind of where I come in. I've intersected with the VCAP program. I've been on the technical committee since the beginning of that committee, and also designed several practices and overseen the implementation. So this is kind of my perspective on it, and it's great to work with people like Blair and Megan and the other district staff, because, and the property owner, of course, that everybody has got their own perspective on it. But one of the things that I said drainage area, that's confirmation, because that feeds right into the calculations. Obviously infiltration test, slope, existing vegetation, utilities, grading, and all the rest. And Megan would be very upset if I didn't mention the planting plan and the native plants. And so, but what I want to ask you, Blair, as the coordinator for this program, is it's kind of a fuzzy area here between follow-up and design. I think this box has a clear demarcation here between those two stages of the process. Depending on the district staff, and really kind of the qualified designers or contractors within a given area, is this more of a blurry line, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a little bit of a blurry line. I think there are certainly districts I've seen that have contractors and designers that are very familiar with calculations and confirming drainage areas and the nuance of installing a BMP to meet DEQ's water quality standards. In which case a district staffer might just be double checking and making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. However, I've certainly seen district staff that like to do the calculations themselves, and they provide it to the designer for use to say this rain garden must be this size and this deep and XYZ. So I think it's ultimately up to the district to determine where their available contractors and the contractor skills and the district skills kind of intersect. However, in the long term, I would like district staff to feel comfortable with the calculations. And that's really what I'm here for, and our assistant coordinator is here for, is to help you work through that. So knowing why we do things the way we do is really, really important. It helps you explain to the landowner. But again, it can be gray based on what contractors are available in your area.
Yeah. And of course you have those DIY situations where, maybe that's a lot of hand holding, on some of the design steps. But, and I think maybe there's some of the VCAP district staff that are relatively new or maybe uncomfortable with these steps. So there's no expectation to do something outside of your comfort zone. But certainly as you are filling those shoes and taking on that job, there's always new skills to learn. I mean, I've been doing stormwater work for 40 years. I kind of feel like I'm still learning, but not to scare you off. That's one of the great things about this field. There's always new things to learn. So your resources, this is just a few. Obviously, the VCAP manual is the primary resource for the designer. It's also a nice resource for the district staff. As Megan showed in the last video, she has some of the things from this manual that she takes in a notebook in the field during the site visit, just to say, here's what a dry well looks like, or here's what permeable pavement looks like. The manual also references all these very complicated specifications from the Virginia Clearinghouse, Virginia Stormwater B&P Clearinghouse. These are really designed for professional designers for development sites or redevelopment sites. But they do have a lot of information. The nice thing about the VCAP manual, it kind of boils it down to the essential things for these relatively small scale projects that VCAP deals with. And then obviously the Digital Atlas, the Florida, Virginia, great resource among other native plant resources. And in terms of the role of the district staff during this design process, I think it was you, Megan, that came up with this term when we were talking about it as the communication facilitator. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes you work with contractors that are not familiar with VCAP kind of criteria. So you kind of have to be that in-between person of working with the VCAP manual and communicating it to the contractor. So if you have a vegetated stormwater conveyance, you might have to be answering a little bit more questions about what meets VCAP specifications if they're unfamiliar with that. And then also like plant choice, if someone wants to install a meadow and the person they're working with chose a bunch of various cultivars, perhaps you need to work with that person and be like, well, we would prefer that you don't use these cultivars, but use the digital atlas, so the Florida, Virginia, and kind of choose species that are native to that county. So it's like a little bit back and forth just to help build the homeowner's application so that it looks good to present to the steering committee.
Yeah. So you're kind of going back and forth with the designer, contractor, property owner, and intersecting with these resources all along. And yeah, I think that the topic of cultivars is maybe another video unto itself, but that's always going to come up. Yeah, in terms of sourcing plants, the availability of plants, the applicability. I mean, some cultivars are just the height, like the Shenandoah panicum or switchgrass, which might do really great on a small residential site, but if you were doing a big meadow, you might want the straight native. Am I getting that generally in the ballpark, Megan?
Yeah, it's hard to find straight natives in nurseries. It's becoming a little bit more available, but it certainly is a challenge. So certain cultivars are a little bit more accepted than other ones if they match with the native species or the native species like basic appearance. So if you change the color of the flower too much, it actually isn't maybe offering as much of the same resources for the local ecology. So it's kind of like that's kind of how we do it. I believe, Blair, you can double check. I usually recommend the straight species first, and then you can kind of, if like we couldn't find the straight species, but we found this cultivar, I'll kind of look into that cultivar a little bit and be like, all right, that is a good substitute. Or maybe you can use this cultivar instead. But yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah, Blair, do you we're not going to have a debate here because yeah, that's another, we could do this as a workshop or something because it's confusing really, about native species, cultivars and all that. But I think what Megan said is right on to me, my experience. So I'm giving you a little space here, Blair, in case you want to say, yeah. But
I want to say yep, and I like to talk too much about plants, so do no harm with your plants. Keep them visually as close to the native as you can. That's the goal.
Awesome.
And I'll just make a little plug for Virginia Native Plant Society. They have a list of local nurseries that do supply native plants, and we usually send that out. So there are nurseries. I know there's a high demand for native plants right now, so they might not always, they're hard to find sometimes.
Yeah. Anyhow, you're not alone. Even within VCAP, there's people like Megan that really know their stuff about the plants. And so don't, if you feel lost with that particular topic, reach out. There's people that can help and would love to help. And you might regret, the long phone calls you might have with some of these people, but anyway, they're they're there and they're very knowledgeable. Okay, so that's design and then build. Obviously, it's the contractors out there doing the permeable driveway or the rain garden or the infiltration practice or dry well. One of the things we're going to talk about is confirmation photos. And I'm going to start here on the right. This was actually a DIY permeable driveway in the James River Stormwater District area. And Stacy down there really did a good job communicating with this guy about photo documentation. So you can see as an excavation, at the right depth, and he kind of photo documented the whole thing. I think he was real proud of what he was doing also, which helped, and he wanted to share it. But some contractors, really need to be reminded, but it's going to be your friend to have all these photos, not just of the finished product, but if there's any excavation involved, you want to see the hole, you want to see the depth, you want to see the soils. So in this case, this is the rain garden that's already been filled in. But anyway, your role might be really just trying to impress on the contractor to do this photo documentation, because you guys are busy, you're not going to be there at every stage of construction. All right, and so this is where the Soil and Water District staff will come in at some point in the future, which is the spot check. And also the check, the check is different from the spot check, because at least the terminology I'm using, the check is when construction is complete, they're ready for the reimbursement, and it's kind of the sign off, and at that point, the BMP is entering the long-term maintenance phase of its life cycle. So you're checking it off, and then sometime in the future, the spot check is the BMP still there? Is it being maintained? Is it operating in the way it was designed to function in terms of pollutant removal? So those are those different things. In terms of the spot check, there is a form. This is just one. This is a rain garden one. There's one of these field forms for every BMP, each of the 12 that are in the VCAP manual. So it's going to take a little teamwork and learning curve to use these forms, but they're pretty straightforward. And I just want to turn it over to Blair to talk a little bit about the spot check process and how it's rolling out.
Yes, so we randomly select across the entire state the practices that are going to be spot checked. And the number has changed a little bit, the percentage has changed a little bit in the last couple of years. But it is based on all of the practices across the state, not just the number of practices any given district has. And you will be notified in July and have an entire year to complete that spot check and turn it in. So that means you have 2 growing seasons to go check out practices that have plants in them. And we'll send you reminders regularly. And if you want us to help you work through what you need to look for or what are some red flags, we can certainly do that. And the rest of the protocol is outlined in the manual, follow-up, corrective action, that kind of thing. But just want you to be aware you have a year.
Yeah, and is it legitimate, Blair, say if staff from adjacent districts or nearby districts would want to kind of support each other or do this together to learn from each other, if they don't have a lot of experience doing it?
Oh my goodness, I of course would love to have inter-district collaboration or your local nonprofits. I know we have relationships with a handful of them to administer VCAP, so of course ask the experts in your area.
Yeah, awesome. Yep, again, that same message, you're not alone. So that's the end of video number 3 on design, build, and check. Next up, this is going to be number 4. We're going to cover each of the VCAP BMPs in the manual. So I'm going to bring my team back in here. Any kind of parting thoughts about this, at least from the district staff perspective, Megan, about kind of design and build and, kind of the level of effort that you have to apply to it?
Yeah, the more complicated the BMP, the more you might be involved. But I think it's good to make sure you're involved because you want to make sure it's done correctly, because then those spot checks might fail. So doing something a little bit more structural, like a dry well or bioretention, you want to make sure that the sizing is correct. And Blair and anyone at the state office, whoever's there, they are really helpful and responsive about making sure the sizing is correct. So again, you're not alone. You can ask, defer to people. There's an engineer also in the steering committee. I ask a lot of math questions too. So it's nice to make sure you're doing it correct in the beginning.
Yeah, awesome. Really good advice there. So I'm going to end this video.
Oh,
And
can I actually
please,
add something,
oh,
Dave? I'm
Blair, of course
sorry.
you can.
I know I always have to add something. And Megan, you can comment on this as well. For those of the district staff that are coming from the ag world, can feel a little uncomfortable to not be as involved in the design process. In VAX, it's kind of more internal, sent to DCR. You've got these engineers that you're working with, or you might have your engineering job approval authority. So I know that that is a discomfort. It's a change. But I just want to make it very clear, it is not your responsibility to design the practices. But as you get more comfortable, you might be checking on those calculations more. So again, there's a spectrum there of skill, but it is very different from VAX.
Yeah, really good point. Yep. Yeah, it's a different world here in the suburbs and urban areas. And not that, I think there's VCAP practices in rural areas too. And so, just kind of, but the scale generally of the practices is different. All right, well, we're going to end this video and welcome everybody back to, I'm sure you're just waiting anxiously to learn about the VCAP BMPs. So we'll see you there.